How do you force one of the world's most heavily fortified naval ports to expose itself in seconds? And what happens when that trap actually works? In the early hours before dawn, the Baltic port of Baltijsk, Russia's most critical naval hub in Kaliningrad, appeared calm, almost untouched by the wider war raging across Eastern Europe. But beneath that surface calm, Ukraine was about to trigger a carefully engineered confrontation designed not to destroy immediately, but to reveal everything. Before going deeper, here's a question for viewers: if a defender fires first and exposes all its defenses, who truly controls the battlefield? The attacker or the one reacting? At approximately 5:12 in the morning, fog hung low over the Baltic coastline as Russian sensors detected what appeared to be a scattered, poorly coordinated Ukrainian approach. From Moscow's perspective, it looked familiar, another drone harassment attempt similar to dozens seen over the past year. Yet this assumption would prove costly. According to Western military analysts cited by Reuters and Defense News, Ukraine has increasingly shifted from single-axis strikes to multi-domain exposure operations, where the real target is not infrastructure, but the enemy's defensive architecture itself. As Russian commanders at Baltijsk ordered an immediate response, the scale of the reaction was staggering. S-400 air defense systems, each costing well over $200 million, activated across the coastline. Pantsir and Tor missile batteries rolled into firing positions. Naval escorts inside the harbor brought deck guns online. Even Russian submarines in the outer defensive ring were placed on alert. Within moments, the port lit up electronically, visually, and acoustically, turning Baltijsk into a living map of Russia's Baltic defenses. Ukraine's opening move was deceptively cheap. Reconnaissance drones costing tens of thousands of dollars skimmed low over the water, while unmanned surface vessels valued at a fraction of a missile system closed in from multiple bearings. High-altitude drones projected false radar signatures, simulating aircraft that did not exist. According to British defense experts speaking to the BBC, this kind of layered deception is designed to provoke overreaction at strategic cost, forcing defenders to spend millions to counter threats worth thousands. The economic imbalance was immediate. Every interceptor missile fired represented a financial loss Russia could not easily replace under sanctions. Every radar sweep revealed frequencies, positions, and response times. NATO observers monitoring the Baltic region reportedly tracked the engagement closely, viewing it as a live demonstration of how modern naval fortresses can be compelled to expose themselves without a single soldier crossing a border. With Donald Trump now back in the White House, U.S. defense officials have publicly emphasized that NATO's eastern flank must learn from exactly these kinds of engagements, where deterrence is tested without formal escalation. Crucially, none of this was Ukraine's main strike. As military analysts from the Atlantic Council have noted, the first wave was never intended to break through. Its purpose was to turn Baltijsk into a beacon, radiating signals, firing solutions, and command decisions that could be studied, mapped, and exploited. In forcing Russia to reveal every layer of its shield, Ukraine achieved something far more valuable than immediate destruction: clarity. And as the last interceptor streaked across the foggy Baltic sky, the real question emerged. Now that Russia's defenses were fully exposed, what would Ukraine do with that knowledge next? If a fortress reveals its shield, how long can it survive once attackers begin striking the seams instead of the walls? That question became unavoidable the moment Baltijsk's radars, launchers, and command nodes lit up simultaneously. For viewers watching this unfold, consider this: once a defender commits every layer of air defense at once, is that strength or desperation? With Russia's defensive network fully active, Ukraine shifted instantly from provocation to exploitation. According to assessments later cited by Reuters and Defense News, Ukrainian planners had already catalogued likely response patterns based on months of prior engagements around Crimea and the Black Sea. What made Baltijsk different was density. In a single coastal zone, Russia had concentrated S-400 batteries, Buk M3 systems, Panzer point defenses, naval guns, and early warning radars. On paper, it was an impenetrable dome. In reality, it was a tightly packed system vulnerable to cascading failure. As Russian radars increased output to track the incoming swarms, they crossed a critical threshold. High-power emissions made them visible far beyond the Baltic coastline. Western military experts speaking to DW and the BBC later described the moment as the switch being flipped. From more than 20 kilometers offshore, Ukrainian forces launched KH-31 anti-radiation missiles, weapons specifically designed to hunt radar emissions. Each missile cost a fraction of the systems it targeted, yet carried the ability to blind an entire defensive sector. Russian crews reacted unevenly. Some radar operators shut down their systems entirely to avoid being targeted. Others attempted rapid frequency hopping. The result was fragmentation. Gaps opened in coverage, first small and localized, then expanding as coordination broke down. NATO analysts monitoring the engagement reportedly noted that Russia's layered defense concept designed to absorb losses became its weakness once layers stopped talking to each other. At the same time, Ukraine intensified its saturation tactics. Low-cost kamikaze drones surged forward at wave-top altitude, forcing short-range systems like Pantsir to expend expensive interceptors. Buk launchers fired repeatedly to protect higher-value assets, while naval escorts inside the harbor burned through ammunition attempting to track threats arriving from multiple axes. According to Military Watch magazine, this kind of economic attrition has become a defining feature of the war, where success is measured not only in damage inflicted, but in resources drained. The financial math was brutal. Every S-400 missile fired cost Russia millions. Every radar temporarily shut down reduced situational awareness across Kaliningrad. Meanwhile, Ukrainian losses consisted largely of drones designed to be expendable. U.S. defense officials speaking after similar attacks on Russian energy infrastructure have emphasized that this strategy aligns with NATO's broader view of modern warfare: exhaust the adversary's high-end systems faster than they can be replaced. Strategically, the implications extended beyond Baltiysk. Kaliningrad is Russia's forward bastion against NATO's northern flank. Any degradation of its defenses reverberates across the Baltic Sea, affecting shipping lanes, energy routes, and alliance deterrence. With Donald Trump emphasizing burden sharing within NATO, European defense planners are watching closely, aware that lessons learned here could shape future alliance investments. Yet even as Russia struggled to stabilize its defensive grid, Ukraine was not finished escalating. With radar gaps widening and command nodes overwhelmed, attention began to shift away from the sky. That shift would prove dangerous because the next phase of the operation was already moving silently beneath the surface. What happens when a battle designed for the sky suddenly drags the sea itself into the fight? As Russian commanders scrambled to restore broken radar coverage around Baltiysk, attention shifted downward toward the waterline, and below it where Ukraine was preparing its most destabilizing move yet. For viewers following this escalation, here is the key question: when even submarines are forced into the open, is any domain of warfare still safe? Facing growing pressure from drone swarms and anti-radiation strikes, Russian Naval Command made a decision that Western analysts would later describe as predictable, but risky. A Kilo-class diesel-electric submarine, one of the quietest platforms in Russia's fleet, maneuvered near the harbor's outer defensive perimeter. Valued at hundreds of millions of dollars and critical to Baltic Sea deterrence, the submarine represented Russia's belief that underwater dominance could reassert control over the engagement. Moments later, heavyweight torpedoes surged through the water toward Ukrainian unmanned surface vessels probing the coastline. Each torpedo cost several $million and carried enough explosive force to obliterate multiple drones in a single strike. From Moscow's perspective, it was a decisive response: remove the unmanned threat and regain initiative. But Ukraine had anticipated exactly this escalation. According to analysis from Defense News and confirmed patterns observed earlier in the Black Sea, Ukrainian forces deployed layered countermeasures beneath the surface. Escort craft towed acoustic decoys designed to distort sonar returns, while underwater drones released synthetic noise signatures that mimicked multiple propulsion sources. To Russian fire control systems, the sea suddenly appeared crowded with false targets. Torpedoes veered off course, detonating harmlessly in open water. The consequences of this deception were immediate and severe. In attempting to reacquire targets, the Kilo-class submarine was forced to rise closer to the surface, briefly exposing its position. That moment proved fatal. A Ukrainian unmanned surface vessel carrying a warhead weighing hundreds of pounds broke formation and accelerated directly toward the disturbance. Satellite imagery later reviewed by Western intelligence suggested the impact occurred within visual range of the port itself. The explosion sent a shockwave across the harbor, rattling infrastructure and triggering alarms throughout Baltiysk's command centers. While Russian authorities did not immediately acknowledge damage, multiple analysts cited by Reuters and Al Jazeera noted that any strike forcing a submarine out of stealth near its home port represents a major operational failure. Even partial damage would require withdrawal for repairs, effectively removing a strategic asset from the Baltic theater. This undersea confrontation carried broader implications. Submarines have long been Russia's asymmetric advantage against NATO navies, demonstrating that unmanned systems could neutralize that advantage at a fraction of the cost, sent ripples through defense circles across Europe. NATO officials have since emphasized accelerating investments in anti-submarine drone technology, viewing Baltisk as a warning rather than an isolated incident. As sonar operators strained to locate additional threats below the waves, Russian defenders now faced an impossible dilemma. Air defenses were still under pressure, surface units were expending ammunition at unsustainable rates, and underwater dominance had just been challenged in full view of the fleet. The carefully layered fortress of Baltisk was no longer controlling escalation, it was reacting to it. And with Russia's attention split across every domain at once, Ukraine was preparing to deliver the blow that would turn exposure into devastation, igniting consequences far beyond the Baltic shoreline. If a fortress is forced to fight in the air, on the surface, and beneath the waves all at once, how long before something critical gives way? That question was answered brutally as the engagement at Baltisk reached its most destructive phase. For viewers tracking this escalation, consider this: when defenses are saturated across every domain, does destruction become inevitable rather than accidental? With Russian air defenses overstretched and naval commanders scrambling to contain undersea threats, Ukraine escalated with a coordinated strike designed to overwhelm what remained of Baltisk's defensive cohesion. According to later reporting by Reuters and Defense News, this phase marked a shift from exposure to attrition, turning revealed weaknesses into irreversible damage. High-altitude reconnaissance drones relayed real-time targeting data, while strike assets moved into position beyond the radar horizon. From the west, Ukrainian aircraft launched long-range cruise missiles at wave-top altitude, exploiting the radar gaps created earlier by anti-radiation strikes. Simultaneously, multiple waves of kamikaze drones surged toward the port from divergent bearings, forcing Russian defenders to split fire yet again. Pantsir and Buk systems fired continuously, but ammunition stocks never designed for sustained saturation began to thin. Each interception succeeded tactically, but failed strategically by draining resources faster than they could be replaced. Then came the decisive maritime strike. A low-profile Ukrainian unmanned surface vessel coated with radar-absorbing materials and carrying an explosive payload approaching half a ton slipped toward the northern pier under cover of the aerial chaos. Western naval analysts later described the maneuver as textbook timing. The USV advanced precisely when Russian operators were focused skyward, not seaward. As the vessel closed within a few hundred feet of the pier, additional drones dove toward a docked Russian corvette, igniting fires across its superstructure. Seconds later, the USV struck. The explosion tore through the reinforced pier, collapsing cranes, rupturing fuel lines, and triggering a chain reaction across nearby storage facilities. Flames erupted hundreds of feet into the air, visible across much of the Baltic coastline. Satellite imagery reviewed by independent analysts showed extensive damage to port infrastructure, including warehouses, ammunition depots, and refueling points critical to sustaining Russia's Baltic fleet. Military Watch magazine noted that such facilities take years, not months, to rebuild, particularly under sanctions limiting access to specialized materials and components. The economic cost alone is estimated in the billions, but the strategic cost may be higher still. Baltisk is not merely a port, it is the logistical heart of Russia's Baltic operations. Its partial paralysis affects naval patrols, submarine resupply, and regional deterrence. NATO officials speaking on background to the BBC emphasized that the strike underscored how fixed maritime infrastructure has become increasingly vulnerable in the age of unmanned warfare. With Donald Trump reiterating U.S. support for NATO deterrence while pressing allies to invest more in defense resilience, Baltisk has become a case study in what happens when legacy fortresses meet modern tactics. As fires continued to burn and secondary explosions echoed through the harbor, the message was unmistakable. Ukraine had transformed exposure into destruction, proving that even the most fortified naval hubs can be crippled without a conventional invasion. And yet, amid the flames and wreckage, an unexpected moment was still to come, one that would reshape how this strike was understood far beyond the battlefield. What message does a battlefield send when destruction is followed not by silence, but by restraint? As flames consumed large sections of Baltisk's waterfront and secondary explosions rolled through the port, Ukraine introduced a moment that few analysts and fewer commanders had anticipated. For viewers watching this unfold, here is the critical question. Can a military strike alter perceptions of legitimacy as much as it alters terrain? As dawn broke over the Baltic, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones remained overhead, quietly documenting the aftermath. Satellite imagery and aerial feeds later reviewed by Reuters and Al Jazeera showed burning warehouses, collapsed piers, and disabled vessels trapped at their moorings. Russian emergency crews scrambled across the docks, pulling wounded sailors from the wreckage. The port that had symbolized Russian naval dominance in the Baltic was now a scene of chaos and triage. Then something unusual happened. Small parachutes began descending through the smoke. Attached were compact medical supply containers, tourniquets, trauma bandages, and emergency injectors delivered not to Ukrainian units, but to wounded Russian sailors scattered across the pier. According to Western defense officials speaking anonymously to the BBC, the drop was deliberate and coordinated, transmitted over encrypted channels with a short message emphasizing that the operation targeted military capability, not human dignity. This gesture resonated far beyond Baltisk. Military ethicists interviewed by DW noted that Ukraine has increasingly sought to separate tactical destruction from moral narrative, especially as NATO publics scrutinize the war's conduct. With Donald Trump again occupying the White House and calling for both strength and restraint in U.S. foreign policy, such moments carry disproportionate political weight. They shape how continued Western military aid is debated, justified, and sustained. Strategically, the strike had already achieved its objective. 2 Russian corvettes were rendered inoperable, fuel and ammunition depots lay in ruins, and key radar and command facilities were silenced. Russia quietly redeployed remaining submarines farther east, reducing its Baltic Sea patrol footprint. Analysts at the Atlantic Council described the outcome as a localized collapse with regional consequences, warning that even temporary loss of Baltiysk weakens Russia's ability to contest NATO naval movements. The economic damage compounded the shock. Repairing port infrastructure under sanctions will strain Russian logistics for years. Energy shipments, naval maintenance cycles, and regional trade routes all face disruption. NATO planners have openly discussed the implications for Baltic security, particularly as Finland and Sweden deepen integration into alliance maritime planning. The message was clear: the era of static naval bastions is fading. Yet the most enduring impact may lie in perception. Ukraine demonstrated that it could strike deep decisively and then deliberately pause, controlling not just escalation, but narrative. That balance matters as the war increasingly becomes one of endurance, alliances, and legitimacy rather than territory alone. As Baltiysk smoldered and emergency crews worked through the rubble, a larger question emerged for Moscow and its partners alike. If one of Russia's most protected ports could be exposed, crippled, and symbolically reframed in a single operation, what does that mean for the rest of the Baltic and for the future of naval warfare itself? If Baltiysk can burn, what does that mean for every other fortified port along NATO's eastern edge and for Russia's ability to project power beyond its borders? As the smoke drifted eastward over the Baltic Sea, the consequences of Ukraine's strike began to settle in, not just in Kaliningrad, but across European security planning rooms from Brussels to Washington. Baltiysk was never an isolated target. It is the logistical keystone of Russia's Baltic Fleet, anchoring patrol submarine operations and energy-linked maritime routes that underpin Moscow's regional leverage. By crippling the port without a traditional amphibious assault, Ukraine demonstrated a new model of power projection, one that NATO analysts now openly describe as infrastructure-centric deterrence. According to reporting from Reuters and commentary in Defense News, alliance planners are studying the operation as proof that unmanned multi-domain warfare can neutralize high-value assets previously considered too risky to attack. The strategic shockwaves are already visible. Russia has reportedly shifted remaining Baltic naval assets farther east, increasing transit times and reducing patrol density. That withdrawal creates space, literal and strategic, for NATO naval movement, surveillance operations, and energy shipping lanes. With Donald Trump emphasizing a tougher posture toward adversaries while demanding greater European defense contributions, the Baltiysk strike strengthens arguments inside NATO for accelerated investment in drones, port defense hardening, and distributed basing. Economically, the damage compounds Russia's broader wartime strain. Rebuilding port infrastructure under sanctions will divert resources from other fronts, including air defense replenishment and energy exports. Analysts at the International Institute for Strategic Studies note that every billion spent on reconstruction is a billion not spent on sustaining combat operations elsewhere. Ukraine's strategy, increasingly echoed in Western assessments, is not about singular knockout blows, but about cumulative exhaustion. There is also a geopolitical signaling effect. The Baltic Sea has long been treated by Moscow as a semi-secure buffer. That assumption is now gone. Finland and Sweden, newly aligned within NATO structures, are accelerating joint maritime planning, citing unmanned threats as a primary concern. U.S. naval officials have echoed this shift, arguing that future deterrence will rely less on large platforms and more on resilient networks that can absorb and adapt to sudden strikes. Perhaps most critically, Baltijsk reinforces a lesson Ukraine has been teaching throughout the war: control is no longer defined solely by territory. It is defined by perception, cost imposition, and the ability to shape escalation. Ukraine struck hard, revealed vulnerabilities, inflicted lasting damage, and then stopped. That restraint, combined with precision, complicates Russia's response options and strengthens Ukraine's position in the eyes of Western backers. As Europe absorbs the implications, one final question remains. If unmanned systems can dismantle a fortress once thought untouchable, how many other assumptions about modern warfare are already obsolete? And who will adapt fast enough to survive what comes next? The Baltijsk strike was not a single attack, but a carefully sequenced operation that exposed, degraded, and ultimately crippled one of Russia's most important naval strongholds. Ukraine began by forcing Russian defenses to reveal themselves, then fractured those defenses through anti-radiation strikes and economic attrition. By extending the fight beneath the waves, Ukraine challenged Russia's submarine advantage before delivering a decisive blow to port infrastructure that will take years to repair. The operation's impact went beyond destruction, reshaping NATO's understanding of maritime vulnerability and signaling a new era of unmanned multi-domain warfare. Looking ahead, the implications are profound. Russia must now defend a longer, more fragile perimeter with fewer resources, while NATO accelerates adaptation across the Baltic. With Donald Trump back in the White House emphasizing deterrence and allied burden sharing, these lessons will likely influence future military planning on both sides. So here's the question for you: if fortified ports and fleets can no longer guarantee security, what truly defines power in modern warfare? And are we already witnessing the blueprint for the conflicts of tomorrow? If you found this analysis valuable, consider subscribing to the channel for in-depth, fact-based coverage of the war and its global consequences.